Hello, 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 everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Fiber Strike 95. And happy Sunday, everyone. I hope you're all having a great weekend so far, and it has been enjoyable for all of you guys here. Today, we're doing a day 7 of our National Park series. In day 20, we're covered our 20th National Park in the United States on this journey, and we're doing here in the Everglades today. So, if you guys may not be aware of the Everglades, this national park is a really special one. It features the largest tropical wilderness in the U.S., and it's one of the very few national parks. It was the first national park to protect a fragile ecosystem. And the Everglades is very biodiverse, especially here in this part of the United States. But really cool stuff. This national park is about 1.5 million acres, of course, so pretty important national park. So we're going to be flying across much of Florida today. So pretty cool stuff. So our flight plan is going to be simple. It's going to be a pretty simple flight plan this morning. We'll start our flight here from Howard Whitted Airport in St. Petersburg, Florida. Then from St. Petersburg, we'll head our way down over to Page Field for the first leg. Then from Page Field, we'll head down over to Everglades Air Park at Everglades City. So we'll stop here, and then for the third and final leg, we'll fly over Everglades National Park. We will have a bush landing here around Whitewater Bay. We'll have a bush landing in Whitewater Bay. So we'll have a landing here. And then from there, we'll continue on north to Peiho Lookout Tower. Then we'll go into the former missile base that's actually in the park. It's a Nike missile base. Going down south, we'll fly into near the Florida Keys. And then finally, we'll head over down to Florida Air Park. So that's what we're going to do here today. So I'm trying to find. So I think we'll do it like this. I'll re-alter the flight plan so it'll be a little shorter. So that's going to be our flight plan for today. Pretty much shortened. So we're going to be flying a very different kind of plane today. And yes, this is the first time we're going to take a float plane for this series. We're taking the de Havilland Beaver. You guys all probably know what the DHE-2 Beaver is. I wanted to take this float plane because I was thinking about taking the Cessna 172 or the X-Cub, but I've been flying a lot of those. So I haven't taken the Beaver out for a good old spin. But yeah, we got the Beaver float plane here today. Really nice, and I thought it would be a fun plane for this type of trip. So we're going to go here. So we're going to go ahead full high. Here, we're going to turn on the alternator and battery. The radios are on. We're going to put them full tanks. Turn on the ignition of both. Fuel boost on. Heat on. Nav light. We'll turn on the So I'm going to go ahead and set the GPS for the first 2 legs of the flight, if you guys don't mind. So, St. Petersburg, Howard-Whitted, so it is going to take me a little bit. I'm just trying to get everything. Page Field. Okay, perfect. So thankfully for our flight altitude, since it's Florida, it's the last state, we're only going to need 1,500 feet through the entire rest of the journey. So we'll do that. So. Yeah, we got the boat, road oars and stuff here too. For you guys who want to paddle on. For some reason the bullet point will not want to move. Oh, I think I know what may be wrong. So let me. It's not moving for a bit. I don't know. Only thing I know it was a... Ah, there it was. It was a bug. It was a workaround. So I had to do the quick pre-flight command. I found what it was. It was the invisible chocks. You couldn't get rid of those. So there we go. Now we get to fun takeoff here from Everglades Airport. Now, if you guys don't know about this airport, this is the main GA airport of St. Petersburg, Florida. And this was also where commercial aviation actually began, of course. The first commercial flight happened here in this airport. Because in 1914, a flying boat from the St. Petersburg-Tampa Bay airboat line took off from the downtown waterfront here into downtown Tampa. And that was the beginning of commercial aviation in the United States. So, very important era for the United States, and a big era for U.S. aviation. So we're going to deploy the landing gear, and we're ready to fly. I mean, a beautiful waterfront airport. Absolutely gorgeous. There's Outland Stadium, the home of the Tampa Bay Rowdies. Used to be a very well-known minor league training facility. And there's Tropicana Field, the home of the Rays, of course. I wonder if they got the roof fixed in time for the regular season to start for the baseball team. So I'm going to take a picture downtown in the waterfront. So, you know, it's actually been a while since I've actually flown a float plane in the sim. It's been a long time. So, yeah. Here we go, guys. And here's our national park, our next one. So we're going to head down over to Everglades National Park. We just hit the 1,500 feet barrier. So St. Petersburg, definitely a really cool airport. This airport has also been used for the Grand Prix at St. Petersburg, actually. So this airport's also part of the Grand Prix in St. Petersburg, which has been going on since 1985, of course. And it even uses one of the airport's runways. But it's also hosted NASCAR Truck Series, Super Trucks, and more. So, here we go, guys. I'm going to keep the speed around 120 knots, so we don't go too quickly through it. But yeah, happy to take this beaver back in the air, that's for sure. Try to keep a healthy speed. So we're going to move on to, and we'll talk about Everglades in a bit. So we're going to cross over from the Tampa Bay area. This is the Tampa Bay. And we're going to head over past Bradenton and Sarasota. So we'll continue on. Continue on straight. So before we get started, I do want to ask you guys, I hope you all have a good weekend, of course, and doing some weekend. Didn't really do too much yesterday. I did watch the Australian Grand Prix last night at all the way to 11 a.m. at night. That was something, but it ended up being a pretty fun race, actually. It ended up being pretty fun, but the winner of the race was George Russell. He won the Australian Grand Prix. And his teammate Kimi Antonelli was second place. Mercedes took top two. Ferrari took 3 and 4. Fifth was Lando Norris. Sixth was Max Verstappen. Behrman at 7th. Lindblad at 8th. Then we have Audi, the top, who are also making their debut, was at 9th, thanks to Bortoletto. Alpine got 10th. In the team I was supporting, Cadillac, Sergio Perez actually finished 16th. Was definitely a pretty interesting race. Several cars were retired and all that in the race. But at least Perez got to finish at 14 Cadillac. So good for them. It was definitely a pretty interesting race for sure. Hey Quartz, good to see ya. I hope you're doing well, my dude. We're heading down to Everglades National Park. So definitely pretty fun and interesting for this. As well. So we'll start talking about Everglades National Park right now. So we're going to start talking about Everglades National Park. So Everglades, for all you guys that may not be aware and what this national park is, Everglades National Park is located in the United States and it protects the southern 20% of the original Everglades here in Florida. And this park is the largest tropical wilderness in the U.S. and the largest wilderness of any kind east of the Mississippi River. An average of 1 million people visit the park each year. If I look at park visitation statistic, Everglades National Park last year. Let me check in the official thing. In 2024, a total of 741,000 people recreationally visited the park last year. But Everglades National Park is actually the third largest national park in the contiguous 48 after Death Valley and Yellowstone. And this national park was declared back in 1947 was a national park, but was first authorized in May 30 of 1934. This park is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1979, and it was even featured in the Ramsar Convention of Wetlands of International Importance, making it only one of 3 locations in the world to appear in all 3 lists. Now, Everglades is very unique, because while most parks preserve unique geographic features, Everglades is the first national park to protect an entire ecosystem. And basically, for those who don't know, the Everglades are a network of wetlands and forests fed by a river flowing a quarter of a mile each day out of Lake Okeechobee, southwest of Florida Bay. And it's the most significant breeding ground for tropical winged birds in North America and the largest mangrove system in the Western Hemisphere. And it's home to 36 threatened or protected species in the park: the Florida panther, the American crocodile, and the West Indian manatee, as well as 350 species of birds, 300 species of fresh and saltwater fish, 40 mammal species, and 50 reptile species. So lots of different plants and animals live in this national park. It's very biodiverse. And people lived around this area for years. So pretty cool stuff. Everglades National Park, really neat park. There's tons to do here. Here in Everglades National Park. I'm doing very well, Court. I'm still a little bit tired from the Formula One race last night, but I'm glad everyone's doing well. So really cool stuff about the park as well. So as we head on down to our first stop of the day, there are definitely some really cool things to talk about, of course. Now, in terms of geology, at least, and geology, the terrain in South Florida is actually relatively inconsistent and flat, and it's because the limestone that underlies the Everglades is part of the diverse ecosystems. Florida itself was actually once part of the African portion of the supercontinent Gondwana, which was a supercontinent that happened way back in 600 million years ago, but broke off. After it separated, conditions allow for a shallow marine deposit to deposit calcium carbonate into the sand, shells, and coral to convert into limestone. And many more over the years have allowed it to compress stuff into limestone. The Florida Panhandle that appeared above sea level happened between 100,000 to 150,000 years ago. As sea level rose at the end of the Ice Age, the water table appeared closer to land. Lake Okeechobee began to flood, and convection thunderstorms were created, and you had a lot of heat deposits. Now, of course, the amount of time that throughout the year that water is present in location determines the type of soil. And there's only 2 parts that make the soil in the Everglades: peat, which is composed by decomposition of plant matter, and marl, which basically is earthy with lots of clay and silt. And it's a result of dried periphyton, or chunks of algae and microorganisms that create a grayish mud. Portions of the Everglades that remain flooded more than 9 months are usually covered by peat. If they're 6 months or less, marl. So those are the two types of soil that are in the Everglades. Oh, I can drive that truck. Wow, they're 50 lives. I'm back though. No worries. Yeah, mine floating too. Oh, oh, sorry to hear about that, Typhon. I hope it goes okay for you. The tooth surgery, that's never fun. That's never fun. So I hope it goes all right for you. I'm gonna check the fuel. I know there's a fuel thing in the middle, but I'm gonna check here too. So I can check the fuel, how much see if I need to change my fuel tanks. So. Yeah, some really cool sightseeing, of course. To our right is Sarasota and Bradenton, very popular vacation destinations in the western side of Florida, in this region. So we'll head down further south to Fort Myers, of course. So, yeah, loaded. I can understand. It's not fun. Dentists and all that, that's not fun. So. So we'll continue on this way, of course, as we continue to fly through this area, of course. So we'll continue on through this way, of course. So we're going to continue on this way, obviously, with the next leg, of course. So we'll continue on this way as well. So before we do that, I do want to talk about next week's sort of streams. So next week, we will have our next game day flight. And our next game day flight will actually be in Europe again. But this time we're going to be in Germany. Actually, we'll be in Germany next week. And our game day flight is going to be in Germany, of course. And it's going to be Bayern Munich versus Bayer Leverkusen. Bayer Leverkusen. Yes, Bayern Munich versus Bayer Leverkusen. So we'll be traveling from Munich to Stuttgart to Frankfurt to Dusseldorf. This should be fun. And I'm planning on taking the DC-3 for that one, actually. I haven't flown the DC-3 in quite some bit of time. So I'll be looking forward to take the DC-3 out for a spin. Like I said, I'll be looking forward to take the DC-3 out for a spin. So I'll be looking forward to that, taking the good old DC-3 out for a spin. So we'll do plenty of flying around this area, obviously. So that'll be Friday, of course, and then next Sunday will be our first national park in part 3 of the series. Here's my pinned comment. It would be Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. Now that one's going to be a very cool national park. And all you guys, are pretty well aware of Smoky Mountains National Park. Anyone that knows national parks should know Great Smoky Mountains. So, should be a really fun one. I can't wait to show you guys Great Smoky Mountains. It should be a lot of fun. Oh, yeah, baked right in the Jeep with sunroof off. Yeah, good thing they'll put sleeping gas. I agree. That's what they did for my wisdom teeth. Yeah, it's not fun. I had to take mine out a couple of years ago. Good thing I took it out when I was younger. So, but yeah, hope it goes well. That's what. Um, so we're gonna go into the next part about the slides. So we'll talk about the next part about the national park. And that's the hydrography. The hydrography of this national park is a pretty important one. While it is common in northern part of Florida, there are no underground springs that feed water to the Everglades. There was an underground reservoir, the Floridian Aquifer, about 1,000 feet below. However, the Everglades has immense capacity for water storage thanks to the permeable limestone beneath the exposed land. Most of the water arrives in the form of rainfall, and a significant amount of it is stored in the limestone. Water evaporated from the Everglades becomes rain over metropolitan areas, providing fresh water supply for the region. Water also flows into the park after falling as rain to the north onto watersheds of the Kissimmee River, and to Lake Okeechobee to appear in the Everglades days later. Water overflows Lake Okeechobee into a river 40 to 70 miles wide, which moves almost imperceptibly. So basically, for those that don't know, when rain falls into this area here in the Okeechobee, a lot of the water transfers down into the Everglades. So that's kind of how the water supply all of it. So very important stuff. We'll talk more about the other parts of the parking part when we get to the next leg, of course. So in terms of our flying, of course, for Sports Cut recap, my local club, Louisville City, just won on Friday night. Louisville City is 1-0 to start the season. I don't know how long that's going to last with the USL strikeout looming, but Louisville City actually got win number 1 this year, and they beat Lexington SC. Big win for Louisville City. That's 3 points for Lou City, baby. There were some other pretty big matches that happened yesterday, of course, and some pretty important ones. Juventus won in Italy 4-0 against Pisa. In Spain, Atletico Madrid beat Real Sociedad 3-2. Germany, we have Borussia Dortmund beat FC Köln. And then today we got some big matchups today, but the big one today, of course, is the Milan Derby that's going to happen. There's definitely some pretty interesting ones going on, of course. Of course, we have the Milan Derby later today at 3:45. Another big game, of course, is going to be um, is Porto versus Benfica is a big one that's going to happen, of course. So those are probably the big ones this week, of course. So that's the big sports stuff going on as well. Yep. Yeah, hydrogen peroxide. It's toxic. You can't swallow it. Dilute with water. That's how you treat your teeth. Yep. You gotta keep it clean. Yeah, it's important. Tooth maintenance is very important. Sometimes people don't take care of their teeth, and that causes a lot of problems later on. So right now we're about to enter into Fort Myers, Florida. A little bit about Fort Myers. Um, Population 86,000 people. Its metro area is around 834,000 people as of 2023. And it's the gateway to Southwest Florida, known for its beaches, tropical landscape, and winter resort. And one of its most famous buildings here are the winter estates of Thomas Edison and Henry Ford are the big attractions here. Other points of interest also include the IMAG History and Science Center, the Southwest Florida Museum of History, and the Kelso Nature Center and Planetarium are the big points of interest here in Fort Myers. So there's Fort Myers going to be straight ahead of us. We're going to be landing at Page Field. Kilo Foxtrot Mike Yankee is going to be our first stop. Of course, Page Field was built back in 1924. Originally was supposed to be a golf course in the area, but they built the airport in 1926. During World War II, this airport was mainly used as a U.S. Army air base and was used by the 3rd Air Force for anti-submarine patrols and conventional bomber training in the B-24 Liberator. Of course, during this time in the 50s, it was converted to an airline airport for airline services. And they mainly used this as the main airport until the brand new Southwest Florida International Airport was built in 1983. Nowadays, it's for general aviation purposes. It's for GA. But it would be interesting to see if you take this through airline service again, like you could used to. It would be fun to do some vintage airline stuff. So, definitely for sure. So here it is, guys. Fort Myers will be here in Fort Myers in about a couple points. This is Punta Gorda here in Southwest Florida. This is not actually Fort Myers, but our destination, Fort Myers, is going to come up pretty soon for this lake. So pretty cool scenery here. Like I said, they build a lot of homes here. And you know why they build a lot of vacation stuff down here in these lifestyle communities? Because guess what? A lot of people move in this area during the winter because obviously Florida is snowbird home. It refers to tourists from colder northern climates who move to the southern states for the winter. Yeah, lots of homes, of course, for vacation. We'll be moving our way down over to Fort Myers. So in terms of my other plans for the rest of the weekend, of course, oh yeah, Ford lives in Kissimmee. That's right. I think he goes down there during the winter as well. Yeah, I know the Kissimmee area. I've been on vacation there a few times in the Kissimmee area. Pretty interesting area, of course. Oh, once I get done with this, I'm gonna do another couple of Fireflyer achievements. Which is the new Start Your Engines achievements. I continue working on those. So we have another one of those that I still have to do. So part 3 and 4 for North America. Lime Rock Part 3 features Lime Rock Park in Connecticut, Bristol Motor Speedway in Tennessee, Canadian Tire Motorsports in Canada. Yes, I put a Canadian track for all you Canadians out there. Road America in Wisconsin, and Talladega Speedway in Alabama. And then Volume 4 is going to be Bonneville Flats. Yes, Bonneville Flats, you guys all know that one. Sebring in Florida, which actually is further west. Virginia International Raceway in Virginia. Darlington Raceway in Darlington, Virginia, or North Carolina, I believe, and Darlington, South Carolina, and Sonoma Raceway in California. So we have a couple new of those flights, of course. So we're continuing moving forward here. Let's see how much of our fuel tank we have left. 11 gallons. I'm going to move it over to the front tank. Yeah, front tank. Let's move it there. So page fuel will come up soon. We just got to get across the water. Into Fort Myers. So there's our first leg of the journey just being done, of course. Beautiful stuff here so far here in the Everglades. Like I said, the scenery isn't really the greatest. I mean, it's Florida. It's flat. So So that's where we're going. So we're about to enter Fort Myers ahead of us. So there's our first city we'll be visiting. Flying over Fort Myers. So we'll be continuing through this area, obviously. But yeah, Southwest Florida is actually the 45th busiest airport in the United States, and believe it or not, this airport's actually the second busiest single runway airport in the United States, behind San Diego, which is pretty crazy to think about this. This airport's actually is the second busiest. Last year, it served 11 million people last year. 11 million. Which is actually crazy to think about. That 11 million flew out of this airport. So yeah, this is actually a larger airport than people realize. Mm-hmm. So here it is, guys, Fort Myers. We're about to make our stop here. So we finally made it to our first stop of the day here. We're about a quarter of the way done. So we're now ready to we'll be ready for the second leg. So here it is, guys, Fort Myers. Here's the city itself. And our GA airport is coming right ahead of us, so we'll turn off the autopilot. Autopilot will be turned off. Still keep some power, of course. Raise the trim. Start bleeding off speed. Then we're going to deploy the flaps, of course. We'll deploy the landing gear, too. So, here we go. This should be interesting. Yeah, there'll be a few national parks in this series, by the way. We would be using the float planes. Lake Clark would be another one, of course. Dry Tortugas would also be another one. But yeah, the main reason I took the Beaver is because it has the best stoll performance, which we would definitely need if we want to get out of the swamp. And we're down. Nice. And we're going to park here for just a bit. So we'll just stop right here. So we'll stop here in Fort Myers for about a minute or two. If anyone else wants to join on in, we're on the Southeast Asia server. And here's our route for this morning, of course. So, as for me, of course, so for the next stream, of course, I still have to wait a while for the Toffees to play again in Everton. Their next match will not be until the 14th of March, which will be on next Saturday, of course, against Arsenal. That's not going to be a fun matchup. Against the Gunners, good luck. Everton can use all the luck they can get. But you know what would be hilarious, though, in the Premier League? If Tottenham somehow got relegated. Imagine them in their shiny new stadium get to be in the championship. Ouch. So, pretty big stuff going up, of course. So we'll So we're going to go up and we're going to go on to the next leg of course. So the question is, how short can I do a stall with this plane? Load points obviously are going to take a little bit longer to take off because of the increased weight of the floats. Wow, I was not expecting to take off with ones like that. So we'll continue on this way for another 51 nautical miles. So we'll talk more about the Everglades as we get here. So there are, of course, many ecosystems here in the Everglades National Park. At the turn of the 20th century, common concepts which should be protected national park become invariably included formidable geological formations. However, as Florida's population grows and urban areas near the Everglades are developed, proponents of the park establishment face difficulty in persuading the federal government and the people of Florida that the subtle and concentrated ecosystems are just as worthy as protection. And thus, when the park was established in 1947, it became the first area in the United States to protect flora and fauna native to the region as opposed to geologic scenery. So there are 9 very valuable interdependent ecosystems in the park. So there are 9 of them. But the list of ecosystems include that of freshwater sloughs and marl prairies, tropical hardwood hammocks, pineland, cypress and mangrove, and marine and estuary. So basically for each of these ecosystems, the freshwater sloughs and marl prairies are the most common ecosystems in the Everglades. These drainage channels are characterized by low-lying areas covered in fresh water, beach flowing at an almost imperceptible 100 feet per day. These slow-moving channel-like rivers are not just features landscape, but central to the flow-form landscape that includes parallel ridges of higher ground. Of course, these marls, of course, are featured lots in the sloughs, are very featured in the park, and which featured a lot of sawgrass that goes up to 6 feet or more, giving the Everglades its nickname the River of Grass. And lots of different, and these areas right here are very excellent feeding location for birds, and they attract a wide variety of wading birds, including herons, egrets, roseate spoonbills, ibises, and brown pelicans, as well as limpkins and snail kites that eat all the apple snails that feed on the sawgrass. They even attract a lot of amphibians and fish, amphibians, and even reptiles like turtles, and of course the ubiquitous American alligator, the Florida cottonmouth, and the eastern diamondback rattlesnakes. The mole prairies are similar to slows, but lack the slow movement of surface water, though instead water seeps through mud. And mole prairies tend to go dry during the year, and alligators play a vital role in maintaining these like by burrowing into the mud, which creates pools of water where fish and amphibians can survive from one year to the next. So, alligators are super important. Very interestingly, though, ibises are pretty well-known birds here in Florida. And there are many of them, but the most notable one that is here in the Everglades is the American white ibis, is the most famous species of ibis in the Everglades, of course. Hey, Brandon, good to see you. I hope you're doing well. We're flying to Everglades National Park today. We were just talking about the different habitats as well. But the American white ibis is the most famous ibis here in the Everglades. It's because it's actually a pretty important animal in terms of culturality in the state. After all, Native American folklore held that the American white ibis was the last to seek a shelter before a hurricane and the first to emerge. And thus the bird became a symbol for endangered optimism, and that's why the University of Miami adopted it as its mascot, Sebastian the ibis. Pretty cool stuff. The next habitat is the tropical hardwood hammocks, and they are often the only dry land in the park. And they rise several feet above the grass-covered river, dominated by plant life, including trees as well, like live oaks, wild coffee trees, and palmettos. And these where you could find for animals like the American green tree frog, birds like barred owls, woodpeckers, and southern bald eagles. Yes, there are bald eagles that actually live this far south. And mammal species include the Florida black bear, which is a bit smaller than the one of the other black bears, red foxes, and of course, one of the major animals in the state of Florida, the Florida panther, the rare and critically endangered cat. Of course, the Florida panther is actually part of the North American cougar, but this one is the one that lives in South Florida. And as of 2024, there are only 200 individuals of the Florida panther left in the wild. So very small populations, of course. Very small. Habitat loss is the primary threat. And the two highest causes of mortality are automobile collision and territorial aggression. So pretty interesting stuff. Then you have pineland, which is actually very threatened habitat. It used to be covered in that area, but it was then harvested for the lumber industry. And mainly or exclusively by slash pines are the main pines that grow in the Everglades. And there's only about 20,000 acres within the park of pineland, and that's mainly being used by the meadowlarks, loggerheads, shrikes, and mockingbirds found in the pinelands. Then you have the cypress and mangrove habitats, which cypress are basically conifers that live adapted to living and staying in fresh water. And cypresses are very common trees that grow in this part. And they provide excellent nesting area for birds like the wild turkey, herons, and kingfisher, as well as mammals living in these areas like raccoons, deer, opossums, and river otters. Then on the coastlines are mangroves, and mangroves have had some really neat adaptations that allow it to survive in salt water by taking in extra oxygen and removing salt in the water. And as a result, they can actually grow along with a lot of the trees. And as a result, they're uniquely adapted to the extreme conditions here in the Everglades. And they're also Florida's first defense against the destructive forces of hurricanes because they absorb floodwater and prevent coastal erosion. And the mangrove system here is actually the largest contiguous system of mangroves in the world. And the mangroves is where you can find a lot of the fish species. 220 species of it, in fact, of crabs, crayfish, mollusks, and other invertebrates that provide main food source for the bird species here. And of course, you can also find the endangered green turtle and hawkbill sea turtle, and of course, the West Indian manatee. Which, fun fact about the manatee, a lot of people may not know about these guys. Manatee is actually the largest living member of the Sirenians, sea cows. But really fun and interesting thing about the manatees and all that sea cows is their relationship. According to the taxonomy and all that, their closest relatives are actually elephants and hyraxes. Yes, elephants are actually their closest remaining relative. So, really cool stuff about the manatee. Then you have coastal lowlands, which is saltwater marshes, and they're very important for birds like the seaside sparrow, wood stork, and eastern indigo snake. And finally, the marine and estuarine are within Florida Bay, which is actually where we're going to be flying over up in the end. We'll be flying over Florida Bay. We'll briefly fly over Florida Bay. We'll fly over there. But Florida Bay basically is home to a lot of the marine animals and stuff too. Which goes into the Florida Keys, which has got sharks, stingrays, barracudas, pelicans, and bottlenose dolphins. But yeah, lots of animals that live in this part of the area. Oh, nice! You're doing a air tour in the king air. Ooh, that's really cool. Yes, they once had wolves here too. Unfortunately, they went extinct, sadly. Yes, the Florida black wolf. It was actually extinct. It went extinct years ago. In 1908, it was a species of red wolves that was native here, but of course they were hunted a lot by a lot of farmers and stuff. They've had to do a lot of hunting, of course. And a lot of people them were extirpated because of hybridization with the coyote, but also because when people expand agriculture and stuff, so pretty interesting stuff, of course. But Brandon, I did one for the DC3 a while back, a couple years ago, and I did a DC3 around the world trip on my channel, which was a lot of fun. It was my first ever around the world trip, and that was a lot of fun with the DC3. I have the VODs on my YouTube, but so I did one with the DC3 a while back. Really cool series I did. I really enjoyed it. The DC3 was a ton of fun. I really liked it. So, really cool stuff. So pretty cool stuff about the ecosystem. Now let's talk a little bit about history of the national park. Oh yeah, 4,500 miles. That's a lot. But yeah, that should. I hope you have a great time on your trip, though. I mean, it should definitely be a lot of fun, of course. So let's talk about the human history of Everglades National Park as we fly our way into the national park. So the human history of this, humans are likely first inhabited the South Florida region 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. There are two tribes of Native Americans that developed on the southern tip, the Tequesta, who live on the eastern side, and the Calusa on the west side. And the Everglades served as a natural boundary between the two tribes. The Tequesta lived near the mouth of the Miami River, while the Calusa lived in 30 different villages. And their diets consisted mainly of shellfish, fish, small mammals, game, and wild plants. Having only access to the soft limestone, many of their tools were made of shell, bone, wood, and animal teeth. And you can still find some of their mounds that still exist in the park. So, all those, of course. And what's really cool, though, is the Calusa, who are more numerous, actually created canal, earthworks, and shellworks, and were able to resist the Spanish attempts at conquest. Of course, speaking of the Spanish had contacted these societies and established missions further north, near Lake Okeechobee. In the 18th century, the invading Creeks incorporated the dwindling number of Tequesta into their own, and neither of the two tribes previously existed by 1800. A lot of it had to do with disease, warfare, or capture. Slavery were the reasons for the eradication of both groups. In the first half of the 19th century, people called Spanish Indians and Mezquitas by white Americans lived in southern Florida, and at the same time, Creeks escaped African slaves that under Indians from northern Florida displaced by the Creek War, formed the area's Seminole Nation. And after the end of the Seminole Wars, Seminoles faced relocation to the Indian Territory near Oklahoma. A few hundred of them actually settled what was now today Big Cypress National Preserve to escape the forced immigration. Of course, in the 19th, of course, many of them now live in isolated points along the coast. From 1859 to 1930, the Seminole Muskie lived in relative isolation, mainly by living and trading. In 1928, survey and construction began on the Tanami Trail and along the northern border of Everglades National Park, and the road bisected the Everglades, including small traffic of white settlers into the Everglades. Now, of course, following the end of the Seminole Wars, Americans then began settling in isolated points along the coast, from the 10,000 Islands to Cape Sable. Communities developed on the two largest pieces of dry ground in the area, on Troglodyte Island and at Flamingo, both of which established a post office in the 1890s. The settlements served as trading centers for small populations of farmers, fishermen, and charcoal burners as well. Both settlements and homesteads could only be reached by boat until well into the 20th century. Of course, Everglades City was grown in the 1920s, which we are actually flying into nowadays, is Everglades City. It reached its brief prosperity in 1920 as the headquarters for the trail. However, there have been several attempts to find and develop the Everglades to drain and develop the Everglades in the 1880s, but it wasn't until the 1920s when a population boom in South Florida created the Florida land bloom. Which was described by author Grumwald as insanity. Land was sold before any homes were ever built, and as a result, they worked on continuing to drain the Everglades. Eventually, in the 1940s, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, a freelance writer and former reporter, began to research the Everglades, and she studied the land for 5 years and published Everglades River Glass in 1947. Word about its disappearance, of course. And eventually this area became a national park in 1947, of course. So that concludes a bit of the human history of the park. Oh, nice, you got to see the Eiffel Tower. Oh, fantastic, Brandon. I was actually over the Flame Tower Pisa on Friday. I was doing a sports flight From Bologna into Milan, we flew through Florence into Pisa. We got to see the Leaning Tower, which is really cool. So, really cool stuff. So we'll turn left. We're going to turn right here because we're about to arrive at our second stop of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and switch. No, yeah, switch tanks to this one. Switch to the other tank. So here it is, guys. Second stop of the day. And we'll mainly talk about the park history and stuff, of course. So we'll talk about park history. So there's our little airport all the way back over in this area. Oh yeah, I never took up the landing gear for all of it. That's the crazy part. I never took off the landing gear. Well, I'll do that for the next leg, take off the landing gear. But here it is, guys, Everglades City. Yeah, this area was once prosperous in the 20s, actually. Nowadays, it's not so much anymore, but you guys get to see what the Everglades come look like nowadays. So there is one interesting thing about, of course, the Everglades. I know a lot of you guys think of the Everglades as the American alligator, of course. What if I told you that the American alligator is not actually as popular in Florida as it is in our states? And while it's true, Florida is actually got a lot of alligators. It's actually Louisiana that has the largest alligator populations. It's actually Louisiana has the most alligator population. So here we go, guys. Welcome to X01. So we'll park right here. And so here we go. So that's our second stop of the day. Pretty quickly, we're getting things through. So we're making our way over to Everglades. So we'll be back in the lake about a little bit. We're just gonna get nearly done with it. So we'll continue on there, of course. So we'll be ready to get through the last leg soon. This one's going to be the last leg, and we'll talk about the rest of the Everglades slides. So we'll get ready to do it in just a minute. So looking forward to So let's go ahead and get ready for the last leg of the trip. So we got one final leg left to go. So here we go, guys. We're going to go ahead and do 135 degrees. Let the blend here. There we go. And we're going to head our way over to Everglades National Park. So we're finally going to enter the national park. So we'll talk about some more slot. We're about 1,000 feet. It's flat. We don't really need to go super high. Plus, a bit lower in elevation wouldn't be a bad thing at all. And look at some of the views, guys. Look at that for some of the views here at the national park. Really cool. Like I said, that's why we took a float plane today, because we're going to be landing in about one or two areas. We're going to be mainly landing. We're going to be mainly landing in around Whitewater Bay, and we'll also do a landing at Madeira Bay. We'll be mainly doing 2 water landings. So let's talk about the history of the national park. Well, for Everglades National Park, there have been Floridians that want hoping to preserve at least part of the Everglades, begin to express their concern over the diminishing resources in the 20th century. In 1960, it was Royal Palm State Park. It was created in 1960 to protect Paradise Key. It includes several trails and visitor centers connected several miles from Homestead. Miami-based naturalists began first proposed the area to be a national park all the way back in 1923. 5 years later, the Florida State Legislature established the Tropical Everglades National Park Committee to study the area, and it was led by Ernest F. Coe, who is the father of the Everglades. And he was a land rover turned conservationist and nicknamed the Farm Everglades. And his original plan included more than 2 million acres, including Key Largo and Big Cypress. And his unwillingness to compromise almost prevented the park from even being created in the first place. Various other interests, such as land developers and sport hunters, deemed the park to be decreased a bit. Of course, the commission was also tasked with proposing a method to raise money for the land, and eventually came with the Great Depression, which caused money for land purchase to be scarce. Though thankfully the House of Representatives authorized the creation of a new national park in 1934, which permanently reserved lands donated by public and private donations wilderness. So it helped us. So of course, Coe's passion and spread of Holland's politically and helped fully establish the park. And as a result, it became a national park in 1947 by President Truman, 1 month after the River Grass was released. And as a result, this area became a national park. Of course, the Central Southern Florida Flood Control Project was authorized by the Congress to construct more than 1,000-mile canal and flood control structures in South Florida. Of course, one interesting thing as well was, of course, there was an airport proposal. Basically, there was supposed to be an airport proposal for there was an attempt for a new Florida airport that was going to happen in the Everglades, but they did fire it off, actually. And eventually, in 1972, a bill was introduced to curb development in South Florida, so that way the national park would have the water it needs. And of course, in 1989, President George H.W. Bush signed the Everglades National Park Protection and Expansion Act to add over 109,000 acres, which also closed the park to the airboats, directed the Department of Army to restore water, and directed the Secretary of Interior to manage the park in order to handle the natural abundance, diversity, ecological integrity of the park and animals. And of course, 2000, they would do even more Everglades restoration plan to restore it even more so. Of course, the park was hit by several hurricanes in 2005, and also suffered from Irma in 2017. But yes, this national park is still going strong even to today, of course. So we'll continue head on forward for another 21 nautical miles. We're going pretty quick. We might be going a little too quickly, of course. We're flying through this, so. So we're going to continue on forward. We're going to continue on this path for another, that'll be to one waypoint, and then after that, we'll continue on straight. Actually, so this is Lossman's Bay, of course. A couple of interesting little bays here in the Everglades. So we're just going to try and So, about some of the activities here at the park and some of the activities here at Everglades National Park. There's plenty of activities here in the national park. Of course, the busiest season for visitors is December to March, where temperatures are lowest and mosquitoes are least active. The park features 5 different visitor center on the Tenami Trail. Is Shark Valley. Then you have, which leads, then there's a 15-mile round trip path that leads to a 2-story observation tower. Closest to Homestead is Ernest F. Co. Visitor Center, where a 38-mile road begins through pine rockland, cypress, and various ecosystems. And you can visit some hiking trails. The Guy Bradley Visitor Center at Flamingo, the Douglas Visitor Center in Everglades City, and the former Royal Palm State Park was the site of the first visitor center in the park. Of course, there are several hiking trails throughout the park. They vary from difficulty on Pine Island, where people can cross through hammocks, pinelands, and freshwater sloughs. Then the Inga Trail is a half-mile self-guided tour through sawgrass mush, where people can see alligators, marsh-wading birds, turtles, and bromelates. So there is some hiking and walking trails, but again, it's not like steep. Though your biggest issue when doing those trails is, well, obviously, the animals. So. So. Yeah, how cool is this, guys? We're about to get through the Everglades, of course. And camping is available year-round at Everglades National Park, with camping with some services available in Long Pine Key, close to the Ernest Visitor Center, where there's 108 sites. Flamingo has 24 of them. Low-power motorboats are allowed in the park. The majority of saltwater areas are no-wake zones. So none of them in the saltwater areas. The freshwater licenses are not sold in the park, but you can get a state license for fishing. However, there's one thing that is not recommended. Don't swim in Everglades National Park. You know why? Because you have water moccasins, snapping turtles, alligators, and, yes, American crocodiles. As well as sharks, barracuda, and dangerous coral in the saltwater. So please avoid it. So there's that too. So we'll turn left here, and we'll head on to the lookout tower here. So now, what about some of the threats here facing Everglades National Park? And this is our last slide of the day. So what are some of the big threats? Well, first is the diversion and quality of water. Less than 50% of the Everglades which existed prior to drainage remains intact. As a result, population of wading birds dwindled 9% of their original numbers between the 1940s and 2000s. And it still is the biggest threat in Everglades National Park to South Florida's still growing population. A lot of the stuff that was built in the 50s and 60s of canals, levees, pumping stations were directed water towards the cities and away from the Everglades, which means low water will leave fish vulnerable to reptiles and birds, and as sawgrass dries, it can burn, die off, which can kill apple snails and other animals feeding wading birds can live on. Another threat is urban encroachment, as a series of levees on the eastern border marks the line between urban and protected areas, but development in these areas still threatens the park system, as Florida still attracts nearly 1,000 new residents every day. Building residential, commercial, and industrial zones near Everglades stresses the balance and ecosystems of the park. On the western border, Fort Myers, Naples, and Cape Corals are expanding, but there are no system of levees to mark that border. Of course, another threat is climate change, because when sea levels rise, pose a critical threat. Both critical and long-term threat to the Everglades, because the park having low topography makes it exceptionally vulnerable to saltwater intrusion from rising sea levels. And the ecosystem altered when freshwater aquifers and sawgrass becomes salinized. And as a result, many of the ecosystems are already collapsing due to saltwater pushing inland. And endangers the species that depend on the fresh water. And finally, lastly, is the endangered and threatened animals. There are about 36 of them here at the park. In fact, the American crocodile's only habitat is South Florida. They were once overhunted for their hides, actually. They are protected today, but are still threatened by habitat destruction and injuries from vehicles. And there are about 2,000 of them living in the state of Florida. And there's about 100 nests in Everglades and Biscayne. Of course, the Florida panther has also been a big deal. It's one of the most endangered mammals on Earth, with about 230 left in the wild. And of course, all the sea turtles and stuff here live too, as well. However, one very big threat into the Everglades nowadays is non-native species that are introduced into South Florida, and has been a considerable problem nowadays. Many of the biological controls, like weather, disease, and consumers who may actually limit plants, don't exist here, causing many to grow larger and multiply far beyond their average numbers. Approximately 26% of all fish, reptile, birds, and mammals in South Florida are exotic, more than any other parts in the United States. Of course, there are different exotic plant species, like the Melaleuca tree, Brazilian pepper tree, and old world climbing fern are the most common ones of plants. But of course, animal species are a big deal. Mainly walking catfish can deplete entire aquaculture stocks. But of course, the most famous animal that might actually be a threat in the Everglades is the Burmese python. Yes, as well as African rock pythons and yellow anacondas were actually found in the Everglades, and especially Burmese pythons, which were a huge ecological concern, and their population's growing exponentially in South Florida. And these are some serious projections that could be to the native risk of native mammals and prey species. That's because python predation can restructure entire food webs and reduce diversity in large portions of the region. And of course, they're also working to get rid of the invasive Australian pine trees. So, yeah, definitely endangered non-native species, and those are the biggest threats to the Everglades. So that concludes the Everglades National Park slides. We'll continue on fun. For the rest of the trip, we'll make our 2 water landings. Yeah, monkeys as well, but it's definitely the Burmese python. They're far away the greatest threat into the Everglades. Basically, for those who aren't aware about the Burmese python and just want a bit more detail why there's such a issue here in Florida, these snakes are quite big. In fact, they can grow up to 16 feet, but there are specimens that can grow almost to 20 feet. These guys are especially bad in Florida, and the reason why they're bad is because, guess what? There are not very many predators to these things. They get to be big enough where there's nothing that can really prey on them. The only predator of these guys is the American alligator. That's about it. And they eat basically a lot of the animals here. And it's not just, they eat basically anything. Opossums, white-tailed deer, raccoons, bird and coyote populations as well. These guys are very bad for the Everglades. So yeah, lots of really nasty stuff too. So this here is the lookout tower, is what would be the lookout tower here in this part of the Everglades. Now we'll turn right. And now we'll make to our first landing site of the day at Whitewater Bay. So we'll make our first water landing today, and we'll actually land. So I'm not going to get out of the plane, obviously. It's too dangerous, and I'm not... Normally, many other parks may not be this big of a deal, but not the Everglades. So, we'll make our water landing here. Then we'll make one more landing at, we'll make one more landing at Madeira Bay, one of the saltwater bays here in the Everglades, and then we'll make our way to Florida City Airport. And that'll wrap up our flight. So, that's going to be pretty simple flight plan, of course. If you guys want to know the invasive species here in the Everglades, here's a link. Here's a link of all the endangered species here in the Everglades. So these are basically the endangered species list here in the Everglades. There are so many of them to pick. I mean, they have all sorts of plant species, of course, but there's a wide variety of animal species here. So here's, guys, our first stop here at Whitewater Bay. So we'll get ready to make our first landing here. So, like I said, even in real life, it would probably be illegal to do it in real life. This is the sim. So here's the crazy thing, though. There is actually a plane crash in the Everglades, believe it or not. In 1997, in 1996, there was a plane crash that was from a scheduled flight from Miami to Atlanta, and it was a ValueJet Airlines DC-9 operating the route. It actually crashed into the Everglades 10 minutes after departing to Miami due to a fire in the cargo compartment. And the fire was mainly caused by mislabeled and improperly stored chemical oxygen generators that killed all 110 people on board. And the airline at the time already had a terrible safety record and all that. But yeah, it killed all 110 people, and it crashed into the Everglades. So we're going to turn off autopilot. And we're going to land around the bay. So here we go. I think here we go. We're about to land. And it still is the deadliest crash in Florida history, too. And we landed. Nice. So yes, we made it to the Everglades, guys. We managed to land here in the Everglades. Let's look at that. We finally landed. How was that for a seaplane landing? That was pretty nice. So, pretty cool stuff. One of the many areas here. But there are also a couple of airplanes that crashed here in the Everglades, too. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 705 also crashed into the Everglades in 1963 that all 43 passengers were killed. And in 1972, Eastern Airlines 401 also crashed in the Everglades. A TriStar crash that caused 101 fatalities, but there was 75 survivors, thankfully, mainly by pilot error. So, there have been plane crashes in the Everglades before. So we're going to go ahead and take off here from our airport here. So we're going to go ahead and put this up. We're going to pull up this, and we're going to take off. And we're up. So here we go. We're going to turn left, and we're going to continue on for our second Everglades landing, of course. So we're going to make our way over to Madeira Bay. So beautiful lane stuff here in the Everglades. We're going to continue on forward for another 17 nautical miles. I'm going to go ahead and lower the RPM a bit. So So we have one final landing left to go. There's a couple of lakes here. Cuthbert Lake, 7 Palm Lake, and we'll make one final landing here at Madeira Bay. So we'll make one last landing into this area, of course. Absolutely incredible. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. So we're going to continue on moving forward here. So there it is, the last area site, Madeira Bay. So one last landing spot of the day. I'm going to change it to the center tank. Just keep adjusting the different fuel tanks here. So we're going to go ahead and for one last look at the go. So one last land left to go. But yeah, not far from here, if you go further south, you can find the Keys. And don't worry, we'll go through the Keys in this series, by the way. That will get us to Tri Tortugas National Park, which will be one of the later national parks in the series. So we're looking very much forward to this new series, of course. But yeah, we're nearly a third of the way done, guys, which is really impressive. So we're going to go ahead and make our landing here. There's our last stop. So there's second to last bush landing here. Really cool. So this is one of the saltwater marshes here in the Everglades. It's one of the part of the Florida Keys Basin. This is one of the saltwater areas. So you can find a lot more saltwater animals, of course. So here we go. Our last leg of the trip. And we're off. Autopilot on. And that's it, everyone. And that's it, everyone. So there. Here we go, guys. And now we're heading to our last stop. So we'll land at Kilo Foxtrot Lima Romeo, and we'll wrap up the stream, guys. I definitely appreciate all you guys showing up here this morning, of course. There is actually a GA thing you could do. You could do a flight scene tour of this national park, actually. Of Big Cypress National Preserve, which is actually just northwest. We actually flew into this region a bit, which was Big Cypress National Preserve. Which is pretty cool, though. But yeah, they also flew, and they also did do a flight in the Beaver, just like this one. So that's also probably another reason I took the Beaver tier today, is because this was the plane they used for the seaplane tours, is this exact plane, the Beaver. So we'll check our fuel situation. Okay. We'll shift to rear tank. It's tank management. That's what we're doing here today. So here we go. So I hope you guys appreciate this trip to the Everglades National Park and enjoy this flight into the Everglades, of course. Thankfully for the next trip, if you guys like natural scenery and mountains and stuff, well, good news, we're going to be in the Smokies on next Sunday, of course. We'll be going through plenty of mountains. We'll definitely do a bush landing at the tallest peak in the park at Kuol. We'll make a landing here at Kuol and see if we can get up to the observation deck. Or if not, we could just fly to the top of it. This one, and Mount LeConte are going to be the main ones we'll be landing in this trip. So, but yeah, very excited though to cover that park. So here we go, guys. We're about to enter into the final leg. So. So I think we'll raid Boozy Sheep probably when we get into this area. So we'll be making the landing soon. We'll go ahead and slow down this plane a bit. And there's the airport. And that's it. Florida City Airport. And so we'll land right here. Here, and so that is going to be it, everyone. I hope you're all having a great weekend here. We got done with part 20 of 63. We're nearly a third of the way there. So we'll be back on Friday in Germany for the Borussia Dortmund versus Bayer Leverkusen match. So we're going to go ahead and say hello to Boozy Sheep, our good friend here. So take care, everyone, and see you all on Friday, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye, everyone.